Well, my name is Lynn Lammers, and my pronouns are she, her, and I live in Lansing, Michigan, but I am from the Toledo area. I work at Michigan State University in the Office for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. I'm an educator with that office, as well as the artistic director of a theater company housed in that office. Just to give a visual description of myself, I am in my office in my home, and I've got some white curtains and a white dresser and a white wall behind me, and I have some noise canceling headphones, some glasses, a wisp of red hair, and a V-neck green top on. And I am a white, fat, disabled woman. So with all of that said, and I'll talk a little bit more about myself and why I'm presenting on disability in a bit. But I do want to take a moment, and I'm going to share my screen. And if you can't see the presentation, please do speak up. So I would like to start by saying that the University of Toledo acknowledges that the region of Ohio in which the university sits is the ancestral homelands of the Seneca, Erie, Ottawa, as well as places of trade for Indigenous peoples, including Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Kiwatika, Lenape, Kaskaskia, Kickapoo, Miami, Muncie, Peoria, Piankashaw, Shawnee, Wea, and Wyandotte. As a steward of public lands, it is our responsibility to understand the history of the land, the people who came before us, and their continuing ties to this place. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. I myself am currently on the land of the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples, which obviously, you know, has a lot of overlap with your region. And some, I think it's really important for us to take a moment to acknowledge where we are, who rightfully this land should be stewarded by, and to continue our self-education on what that means and how we can find ways to hand the stewardship of the land back to the people who should be stewarding it, and also to acknowledge the history of Northwest Ohio in particular, which was the home of some rather bloody battles and dark moments for our country. So studying sort of what went on in Northwest Ohio is important to me because I grew up there, and it's where my family, when they came over from Germany, came and settled, and most of them still live there today. So as we acknowledge the land, we also know that we have work to do and need to spend time digging into the history of what happened and how things got to be the way they are. So tonight's presentation is on centering disabled people in healthcare. As I said before, my pronouns are she, her. I am a multiply disabled fat woman, and I'll talk a little bit more about my disabled identities tonight. But I am also a white, straight, cisgender person, and I want to acknowledge my positionality in the discussion of disability, that we should be looking to those who are most impacted by inequities and listening to them and following their leadership. And so when we talk about that, we're thinking about folks whose disabled identities intersect with queer and marginalized racial identities. And so I do want to acknowledge that I have some privilege in this space. But all of that said, I'm grateful that you're all here. And for those who are watching this after the fact, I appreciate that. I'll be sharing some perspectives on disability, and I might mention a few things about anti-fatness in the medical field. I'm going to share some resources to deepen your understanding, and then, like I said, we'll leave time for dialogue at the end. Now, this presentation, which will be under an hour, about disability in healthcare, of course, is one tiny, tiny, tiny little itty bitty raindrop. And to truly understand how to center disabled people in our work and our communities, the amount of learning, unlearning, listening, and relationship building we need to do is a vast ocean. So view this session as coming through my particular lens. It's part of, I'm sharing information and ideas with you, and it's part of your larger journey of self-education, of learning and unlearning. That said, I wanted to say, I didn't mention at the top, if anyone needs closed captioning, there is a function in the lower left-hand corner, and the lower right-hand corner of the WebEx screen has captions and highlights. So please feel free to ask James questions in the chat if you have any issues accessing that. So I also want to acknowledge the scholars, the thinkers, the writers, activists, advocates that I have learned so much from. These are a few of many. Alice Wong, Caleb Luna, Imani Barbarin, Aubrey Gordon, Reagan Chastain, Marcus L. Mercedes. You can Google any of these people and find lots of their writings, videos, podcasts, essays, journal articles, all kinds of things, videos, and deepen your learning. But I certainly do not come by this knowledge on my own. I stand on the shoulders of lots of disabled people over many centuries. A note about language. So many disability advocates have moved towards using identity-first language in recognition of disability being a central part of one's identities. Other members of the community, including individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, still prefer person-first language. So in an effort to be inclusive of all members of the disability community, I'm going to use both. I'll use disabled people, and I'll also use people with disabilities today. Slide 7, barriers to care. We know, you all know, that there are lots of barriers to care for disabled people. If you would take a moment to enter into the chat any barriers that you might be aware of in terms of what disabled folks face. So take a moment in the chat. What are you aware of? Kinds of barriers to healthcare are you aware of for disabled folks? Okay. Somebody's coming in here. Physical space in a hospital can be a barrier. Chairs, desk height, beds. Thank you, Laura. Any other thoughts? Give it another couple seconds. Well, thank you for mentioning the physical environment, Laura. I want to acknowledge that, and that's here on my list. But I also want to mention medical ableism, ableist stereotypes, attitudes, so the interpersonal stuff, structures, our processes, how we move people through a hospital process or through a care plan, the physical environment, financial barriers, and time barriers. It's a lot. And the important thing to note here, when I talk about the ocean of all we need to know and understand and the action we need to take, the thing to keep in mind is that when we do this work in the collective, when we are talking about it with our peers and making plans and folding it into our daily work alongside everyone else we work with, the work becomes more doable and sort of multiplies itself and becomes bigger and spreads. So, there's a lot here, and today we're just going to talk about little pieces of it and continue to investigate these barriers and how we can remove them, undo them, unlearn them, eliminate them, right? So let's start by reframing how we think about disability, right? So we're going to talk about two, this is a conversation that has been happening in the disability community for quite some time. The notion of how we frame and think about disability. There's the image that we see on the screen is a person sitting at what looks like a school desk. They're have their hands folded on the desk. They're sitting in a chair in, a shirt and pants. And on the left, it says internal problems with a whole list of words with arrows pointing to this person. The internal problems are listed as insane, disorder, defect, sick, abnormal, deficient, diagnosis, mistake, broken, right? That is the medical model. The social model is listed under the external barriers on the right. So the words listed for external barriers are communication, technological, organizational systemic, physical architectural, attitudinal, disabling environment, and human rights violations. And here are the sources for talking about the medical and social models on the right. You will be able to access this PowerPoint and all of the resources in it, and you can contact Dr. Jenkins' office if it's not sent to you. So the medical model, let's talk about it a little bit. So I'm just going to escape right out of here and just talk for a bit. So you can see me. Okay. So the medical model is a way of understanding illness, loss of function, and people in the disability community have largely rejected it, not all, in favor of the social model. Some folks with chronic pain, especially, and some chronic illnesses especially, find the medical model useful, which, disabled folks aren't a monolith. We all have different experiences, different relationships to our bodies and to healthcare. And so, we're not a monolith, right? There's going to be different perspectives. I would say, for me, both models are useful. And because I have different disabilities, one of my disabilities is chronic pain. And I definitely want to think about with my care providers, eliminating that pain. That is definitely my goal. That disability I would love to have go away. And that's for me. I'm only speaking for me. Generally, the medical model views disability as a defect within the individual, and which, when you internalize that notion that there is something inherently defective about you, and when other people perceive you in that way, it tends to color how you are treated, right? And so this model assumes that in order to have a high quality of life, defects must be cured, fixed, or completely eliminated. Like I said before, I'd like my pain to be completely eliminated. That would be great. Healthcare and social service professionals have the sole power to correct or modify these conditions according to the medical model. Many of us, though, including those with significant functional limitations, communication difficulties, and high support needs, strongly identify with our disabilities, right? They represent important elements in terms of our identities, how we see ourselves, how we connect to our families and our communities, and to larger society, right? And so, for instance, for many like neurodivergent folks, myself included, identify with and feel connected to the culture of divergence, neurodivergence. I've heard deaf people a lot of times say the same thing, that there is a culture around deafness and being hard of hearing that people do not want to see deafness eliminated, right? So for neurodivergent people, we see the ways that our brains diverge from the way our brains work, and how that diverges from how neurotypical folks work, as an asset and also fundamental to who we are. For me, my brain is an absolute wonder. I am able to synthesize a lot of complex ideas quickly and deliver them back in a way that illuminates things anew for listeners. That's probably why I find myself being a presenter these days. I also have moments where my cognitive function, you know, that sort of executive function, isn't where I want it to be and isn't where other people may want it to be, and I find it harder to function. And then in a moment that will turn on a dime, and my brain will be creatively spinning and solve several complex problems in a row and dream up lots of possibilities for how to approach lots of different things. So I wouldn't take that away for anything. It makes me who I am. So when we cast disability as a defect, we see two tropes. We see a lot of tropes about disabled people, but the two main ones that emerge are we're there to be pitied. Oh, isn't that awful? That they have to live like that, their lives must be so awful, or to be an inspiration. We're objectified, we're there to make able-bodied people, you know, we're reduced to being like kind of this device to make able-bodied people feel good about themselves. And I have certainly been guilty of that in the past. I've certainly had moments in my life where ableism came to the fore, and the way I viewed disabled people was very like, oh, wow, he did that. Good for him. You know, you see the news story, the inspirational news story, and it feels like the disabled person and their experience is very distant from who I am. It has nothing to do with me. I'm looking at it over there. happening, and you know, they are automatically othered in my mind. I can't relate to them, and all I can think about is how much they have to quote unquote overcome, right? And so this is really about starting to shift your lenses and how you frame disability, right? This is the journey that I've been on. So what this does is this sends a message that you should have low expectations of disabled people, that they are weak, that they will always need your help, which leads to fewer opportunities, right? If you are assuming someone doesn't have X, Y, and Z capacity because they have this disability, then you're not going to think of them when it comes to this job, this scholarship, this program, this whatever, right? I personally hear comments from people all the time who talk about being disabled or being fat as their greatest fear. Oh, that would be awful. They would do anything to not do that. I couldn't live. I'd rather die even. They'd rather die than be like me. And that is flabbergasting to me because my life is really awesome, and I'm great, and have a lot of fun. People like me. I make things. I say things that people find interesting. I I have no question about the value that I add to people's lives, right? And I have no question in my mind about the value of my existence, right? So, you know, I like myself as much as anyone else does, right? And I have things about myself that I don't like as well. My difficulties in life as a fat, multiply disabled person have less to do with me and what's going on with me and my body, and more to do with the ways that people and institutions treat me, right? Which brings us to talking about the social model a little bit more. So I want to look at an example. I want to show you a fun little video. So if you aren't able to hear it once I play it, somebody please speak up. This is an example of external and structural barriers standing in the way of abled people. So imagining a world where that caters to people, that centers people who use wheelchairs and just completely disregards anyone not using a wheelchair. So let me share. Air computer audio. Gotta click that box. Okay. Somebody speak up if you are unable to hear. There we go. Ever thought about what it's like to live in a world that wasn't designed with you in mind?
Meet Sam. Sam is starting a new job today. He sets off with plenty of time to catch.
Yeah, the sound should be playing. There's not sound at the beginning, but there is.
I could hear the sound.
Could you? I wonder why I can't hear it. Okay, well then I will just play the video. And you all can.
Meet Sam. Sam is starting a new job today. He sets off with plenty of time to catch the bus. Getting on the bus is difficult for Sam as he has to bend down awkwardly to get through the door. There are no seats. He asks a disgruntled wheelchair user to move from the priority standing area. This has been specially adjusted for non-wheelchair users. He arrives at the office and meets his new manager. He waits patiently as they find the only chair in the building. He carries his chair to his new desk, hitting his head on the low ceiling as he goes. He finds his induction pack on his desk, but quickly realises that it's all written in Braille. He's confused and turns to his colleagues for help. They tell him they'll be happy to get it translated, but this will take at least a week. Sam carries his chair to the canteen and joins his colleagues for lunch. They ask him lots of questions about what it's like to be too tall and if he's considered seeing a doctor to fix it. After lunch, they decide to plan a Save Sam's Knees fundraiser to raise money for a hardened helmet and lower leg guards so that he can walk on his knees more easily. They all gather to tell Sam what they have planned. Sam asks,
"Couldn't you just have raised the roof?" I've just spent a day in a disabling world where everything is a battle. Disabled people are disabled by barriers at work and in day-to-day life, not by their impairment or difference. Removing barriers is the only way to achieve equality for disabled people. That is what the social model of disability is all about. Welsh Government will work to embed the social model of disability in everything we do from this point on.
Thank you to the Welsh Government for their contribution of this video. So I hope everyone was able to hear that. I'm assuming that you were able to hear it, and oh dear, my computer's freezing out. And there we go. Thank you. Okay. So hopefully everyone could hear that, and there's access to the video in the PowerPoint that you can all get a hold of from Dr. Jenkins' office. So, yeah, the social model calls for an end to discrimination and oppression against disabled people through education, universal design, and normalizing the provision of access needs. So if an environment, as we saw in the video, if a physical environment is created so that people with understanding that different bodies and disabilities and different body functions, bodies that function in different ways, are a part of the normal, beautiful biodiversity of human life, then if all environments are constructed and created and sort of designed for lots of different kinds of uses for lots of different kinds of bodies that function in different ways, then we don't have this situation where, as we saw in the video, the tall person, the person who stands rather than uses a wheelchair, can have access as well, right? So the thing about this is that, to reframe it, a big moment I had was that someone said to me, you know, we all have access needs. We all have things that we need in order to function in a workplace, in our homes, in our communities, going to the grocery store, everything we do in life, right? The world is built to automatically adjust for able people's access needs, and not normally for, or most often for, disabled folks, right? So I have access needs in order to be able to give this presentation today. I needed to have a chair to sit in because I can't stand for an hour. I needed to have a computer and internet. I needed my glasses. I needed light and electricity. I needed access to food so that I could have the energy to do it. I needed access to a private, quiet space. I also need access to my noise canceling earphones. And so, you know, I walk into any workspace and a chair is going to be automatically provided to me. You know, but to get noise canceling headphones in order to accommodate some of my features of my neurodivergence, you know, I can't automatically assume that that's going to be accessible to me. So I need to think ahead before I leave the house about what I will need for that day, and attending to my sensory needs and my ADHD needs, right? So, and we always think about these things, right, as accommodations, which I don't know that there's anything necessarily wrong with the word accommodations. That's the word we commonly use around disability. But sometimes the word accommodations can feel, can sound a little bit like we're doing someone a favor on accommodating you, versus we all have access needs. Sometimes my boss or the person inviting me over to a party or the person providing a presentation can support me with some of my access needs that might not be universal and a given. Sometimes I have to provide my own. I'm not going to sign up to go to a workshop or a presentation and ask them to provide me with my prescription of classes, right? Sometimes I provide my own access needs. But we all have them. Some of us have access needs that are like, I need a babysitter for an hour in order to be able to attend this presentation after work hours, because my kids are going to be knocking on that office door, and, you know, so access needs is something that everybody has. And another reframe that we might talk a little bit more about later is that, you know, disability is not a static thing. Everyone is likely to experience some form of disability in their lifetime, especially when we get to talking about aging. So let me share my presentation with you once again. And I want to talk about Dr. Iadzoni, who did a study. Dr. Iadzoni is in the College of Medicine at Harvard. And I have a link to the New York Times article about this study in the resources at the end, so you can read all about her methodologies and how she conducted this study. But she did some focus groups with some physicians, And when granted anonymity in the focus groups, physicians let their guard down and they shared opinions consistent with experiences that many disabled people have identified, which is that the doctors admitted that they don't want patients with disabilities. That's a smack to the face, hard thing to hear and know and understand, and also knowing that this is true. And in fact, if I can just make a little note about fat people are often flatly refused care. I will not treat you until you lose weight, right? So that's a side note. But anyway, so the question is why, right? These doctors are not bad people. They did not get into medicine because they don't care. Why is this the attitude, right? And there were structural issues identified in the study. So as much as we can change our language and reframe our perspectives and change how we interpersonally interact with disabled folks and disabled patients, there are structural issues that these doctors are, their limitations, right? Buildings inaccessible for wheelchairs, unable to weigh wheelchair users, difficulty getting a patient onto the table, limits on the doctor's time. That's a big one. To be able to slow down and let a disabled person talk about all that's going on with them, with all of the complexity that involves, and to give you time as a doctor to think and think together out loud, and dig deeper and investigate. There's not time for that the way things are currently structured. The high cost of ASL interpreters, lack of communication between appointment scheduler and doctor and staff leaves no time to prepare. So a person with a chronic illness or a disability might disclose that when they set the appointment, but then that information is not passed on, and the staff has no time to prepare. And the list goes on, right? So, it's all so much. How do we envision and dream a future that is different? And I wanted to share these thoughts from Alice Wong, who is an advocate and a writer. This is from her memoir that just recently came out. In the future, care infrastructure will be one that treats care as a normal part of the human lifespan and not a failure or weakness to need help. We are all going to need care at different points in our lives, and it is just part of the state of being a human being. And sometimes we will be disabled from. Some people are disabled from the moment they're born. Some people will have a disability that happens somewhere in life and becomes permanent. And some people will break their leg and need care, and it heals, and they're able to get back most of their functionality, right? One led and designed by disabled people and others who need or provide care. One that is free, publicly funded, and not means tested or linked to employment. One that puts a primacy on self-direction of the individual, bodily autonomy, and dignity of risk rather than formulaic medicalized training that pathologizes disabled, older, and chronically ill people. So that's the dream. That's the big picture dream, right? And I do want to add to that to bring back the idea of intersectionality that I talked about before, this quote from Imani Barbarin, who goes by @CrutchesAndSpice on Twitter and I think on Instagram. Disability is a natural part of human diversity. However, who becomes disabled is often a result of structural, institutional, and interpersonal inequality. These systems also determine how people fare once disabled. To combat ableism, we must also address racism, sexism, transphobia, and queerphobia. So all of these oppressions are intertwined and will need to be unraveled simultaneously. So what can we do? Where can we start? You know, how do you just pull one thread a little bit? We're not going to unravel this whole thing tomorrow, right? First, self-education. Read, watch, listen, attend, ask questions, get curious. Examine your own biases and discomfort, you know, ask yourself, you know, what's going on for me when this patient shows up, I feel anxious, or I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, or I feel whatever. Examine what that discomfort is about. Instead of avoiding and rejecting those patients, we need to change the culture of medicine, but we also need to change ourselves and examine within what's going on. There is a sort of mindfulness and mental health piece to this that's part of examining any kinds of biases that we hold. Honor the embodied knowledge and expertise of disabled patients. So you all, medical health professionals, spend so many years and so many hours studying, accruing all this knowledge, accruing all this experience, just layered understandings of how the body works. And it is, I am in awe of that because I could never, ever do it. And also at the same time, I want to hold that disabled folks, you know, a chronic illness, chronic pain, a disability, you know, they are living in that body and functioning every day with their body. And so they have a level of sort of lived, internalized, embodied expertise about their bodies that needs to be honored. It's more data, right? It's more data for getting to the problem solving of how can we help you work together to help you exist in the world in a way that's more functional for you, right? And so I think that's a really big piece of this. Pay attention to what disabled disability advocates are calling for, centering disabled voices, disabled leadership, disabled advocates and activists. Listen to disabled people. As a professional, you do have the power. You have some power in advocacy spheres. So how can you actively champion greater disability equity? How can we collectively, if we speak with our peers, talk about what advocacy looks like and what's the thing we can do? What's the piece of the puzzle that we can put in? How can we make our voices heard? Don't leave disability as an afterthought. Put it at the front and center of your planning and decision making. You know, if you don't know how to do something, try to find sources and ask. And it's also okay to hypothesize and experiment. If we set it up this way, if we, you know, move this exam room to be like this, if we bring the patient in this way, and see what works and understand that it's all about hypothesizing, experimenting, right? Ask if this is working for a patient, adjust if it's not, humbly receive feedback, and know how to process that feedback for yourself so that your own defensiveness doesn't become a part of the equation for the patient. Yeah, I think I'm maybe running a little low on time, so I just want to leave some time for any dialogue or questions. There are links to continue learning. The 21-day Disability Justice Challenge is a great place to start. Alice Wong's Disability Visibility Project is groundbreaking and beautiful. Disability Discourse Overview and Critiques of the Medical and Social Models is a journal article from a researcher, if you want to know more about those models. And then we have lots of other resources here for you to look at. I really want to thank you all for your time today. If you want to reach me, my email is lammersl@msu.edu. And as we transition into questions and dialogue, I just want to leave you all with a quote. As disabled writer and scholar Allison Kafer says, to eliminate disability is to eliminate the possibility of discovering alternative ways of being in the world, to foreclose the possibility of recognizing and valuing our interdependence. And that quote, it's really meaningful to me because, I mean, we know this, and you know, the differences that we have, human to human, make life more interesting and make life more full and more rich. So yeah. I would now like to just turn it over and provide a few minutes. It looks like we've got 10 minutes left. I would love to hear any reflections or reactions, things that are on your mind. You can feel free to turn on your mic and or your video, enter thoughts into the chat. What are some of the things that are bouncing around in your head after listening to me for 40, 50 minutes?
It looks like we have a question in the chat.
Oh, we do? Okay. I didn't see. When initiating an interaction with a patient, do you recommend any scripting to assure we are making the patient comfortable? Yeah. I think when I hear you use the word scripting, I assume that you are meaning is there any language that is helpful in that moment? I can't think of anything that from interaction to interaction would always be appropriate. Just that you, ask questions about folks being comfortable, ask folks about if they have anything they need while they're waiting for a procedure or waiting for an appointment. The other thing I would say is to listen to the language that people use to talk about themselves and their own bodies, because that gives us more information, that gives us more data. And if we can mirror how they talk about themselves and use their language, it might help to make greater sense together out of what they're asking for and what they need, right? And so sometimes getting away from some of that medical jargon can be a good thing. And how are they relating to the issues coming up? How are they describing it? And going back to their language and their words over and over with them can be affirming and can let them know that they're being heard. Other questions or thoughts people want to share? It's okay if there's not. I'm very comfortable with silence. Oh, I love silence, actually. Okay. What is a recommended change you would like to see made? Well, I mean, I can speak for my experience. I think the fact that, I mean, I think I feel really lucky a lot of times. Because when I went into my doctor as a 40-year-old woman and said, I think I have ADHD, he didn't think I was seeking meds. He listened to me and assumed I was telling the truth. I wish that healthcare providers didn't make the assumption that my fat body and my disabilities are related or that one caused the other. So assumptions is a big thing. Like they're, it's wild to me. I have disabled friends who tell me, well, my doctor doesn't ask me any of the questions about how many sexual partners do you have or are you using protection and all that. They just assume that I don't have sex. And that's wild to me because disabled people have sex. So just kind of, I wish that people would take time to hear stories from disabled people, disability visibility. Alice Wong, that was her first book. It's an anthology of different disabled people telling their stories. I got it on audiobook and listened to it while I was in the car, and it just expanded my mind in terms of the automatic assumptions we make around disabled folks. I will say as a fat person, I really wish that the healthcare field and doctors would ask themselves why taking weight measurements is important and why BMI is important. We know that BMI is a really problematic measure, and it wasn't created to be used the way it is, and the data it gives us isn't always helpful. I just wish that doctors would ask to stop weighing me. What I want to know is, what are my glucose levels? What are my, take my blood and test my blood to understand what's going on with my diabetes. That's a number that to me is meaningful. The weight number, I don't understand why we need it. And I think a lot of us are asking that question. What is BMI and weight really giving us? And the focus on weight and fatness in healthcare doesn't seem to be in alignment with its usefulness. And telling someone to lose weight or I'm not going to treat you, the data is out there about diets. We know that diets don't work, right? 95% of folks who do intentional weight loss are not able to maintain it. So if we can stop pretending that fat people just have a lack of willpower and aren't helping themselves. Disabled people get the same attitudes, like, well, you've got to help yourself, right? The notion that when we ask for support, that we are trying to get away with something, or can't deal with any level of struggle at all. And that's not the case. Struggle is a norm in our life. Adversity is a norm in our lives. So, you know, those are some of the things that I would like to see folks start to get uncomfortable and ask themselves and each other some questions about. And I do have some resources to that end in the links for continued learning slide on slide 15. Well, it looks like it's 6:30. And I want to say again that I really appreciate all of you for being here, and all of those who watched the video after the fact. I really appreciate having the space to talk about all of this, and I look forward to hearing more about what University of Toledo College of Medicine has in store for addressing disability justice. So take care all, stay warm, get those sidewalks shoveled, and I'll see you around.